Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. Today's special edition features John Richardson-Lauve, Director of Mental Health at Child Savers, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting the mental well-being of children through positive bonds with adults. Today we are sharing highlights from a recent symposium co-sponsored by the National Resilience Institute and Tanager Place. Tune in to John's presentation now, and I will be back with tool number 1.
So kid comes home from school, goes to an after-school program, comes home to a loving, caring parent like any of you, and comes home. And the traditional view is that we look at that kid and we say, you need to finish up your homework and then you can go outside and play, right? That makes sense. Did anybody in here eat their dessert before their lunch? Okay, few people. But most everybody knew, because we all have good conditioning from our parents, that you eat your dinner or your meal first. You got to finish up your vegetables before you get to eat your dessert. What I know when that kid comes home from school, if I give that kid just 20 minutes of gross motor play and activity, that when they come back and sit down to do their homework, that I'm going to get better retention of content, I'm going to get better quality of work, and it's all going to be done in a faster amount of time. Research shows that. That's the different perspective that we get to take when we look through that trauma-informed lens, when we actually look at where people are coming from, not just the boneheaded things that we've been doing forever. Because it works for some kids, but it doesn't work for every kid. What we're talking about is trauma that people experience in childhood, but we're talking about its effects across the lifespan. Across the lifespan. Because 64% of the general population have an ACE score of at least 1. That's 2 out of every 3 people. And for those of us in here, people who've chosen their career path to be healers, we are wounded healers. We tend to have higher ACE scores than the folks working at the bank down the street. And we have to remember that. 12.5% of the general population have an ACE score of 4 or more. That's why trauma is important. So we talked about trauma, we defined trauma this morning. I want to give you an alternate definition of trauma, because this helps us find out how we're going to respond effectively to trauma. Trauma is just the experience of being overwhelmed. And that's proportional to what I'm able to cope with right now. Because what I can cope with on Monday morning when I'm coming in from a nice restful weekend is different than what I can cope with on Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock when I'm really wanting to clock out and be done for the week. I can be sitting in I can have this much coping skills. I got a giant big bucket of coping skills. But if I'm faced with this much adversity, this much stress, I'm overwhelmed. As I'm sitting in my living room in Puerto Rico or Houston, and there's 2 feet of water in my living room. It's midnight, it's still storming outside. I haven't seen a rescue vehicle in 12 hours. The power's been cut off, my cell phone just went dead, and the water's rising. That's this much adversity, and that's overwhelming. Then, of course, we all know people with this much coping skills. And they get overwhelmed. This much challenge, which most of us could handle pretty easily, is overwhelming, and they fall over. Trauma is the experience of being overwhelmed, which is proportional to how I'm able to cope. Trauma is in the eye of the beholder. It's about how you experience that event, because the same event can be experienced by different people in dramatically different ways. Think about people who are scared of snakes or spiders. You ever tried to talk somebody out of their fear of snakes or spiders? Go ahead, you can touch him. He's fine. He hasn't bitten anybody in a whole week. He's safe. Does it matter how safe I feel like this snake is? No, it matters how safe you feel like this snake is to whether you're going to feel safe or not. Trauma is the experience of being overwhelmed. So if we look through this trauma-informed lens, which is, again, going to help us to how we build resiliency, we have to respond to the need rather than react to a behavior. Anybody seen this phrase before? Good. We have to respond to the need rather than react to the behavior. Because if we don't respond to that need, if all we do is suspend that kid for 5 days because they're acting like a jerk in class, they're going to come back and have the same exact behavior. If I get popped for shoplifting and get locked up for a couple days, and then I get out, do I learn how to be a more fine, upstanding, kind, trustworthy individual in the community? No. What I learn is to be a better thief. I learned how to wear a big puffy jacket. I learned to look for cameras and mirrors. I learned to bring a lookout in with me when I go into the store. I learned to go into the store when it's a really busy time so I can get away with things because nobody can see me through the crowd. That's what I learned through punishment. We have to respond to that need, which means we need to take the time to get to know the needs of the people around us, to get to know their story, because we're all the sum of our stories. We are the sum of our experiences. And I don't know any place where that's more important than when we look through that trauma-informed lens. Because we have to ask this question of what happened to you, not just what's wrong with you. What's wrong with you is a medical model where we say, if something's wrong with you, I'm your doctor, go ahead and we'll figure out what's wrong with you, and then we'll have a prescription, we'll figure out a treatment, and we'll fix it. Well, we don't get to fix people who have trauma. We get to help them deal with it. But it's always going to be part of their story. And when we ask this question of what happened to you, we honor that story. We honor that story and allow it to become alive inside that person and allow them to cope, to manage, to deal, to heal, to survive, and to thrive. Vitally important to ask this question, what happened to you? Now, sometimes, of course, people aren't going to be able to answer this question. I have two beautiful kids who come into my clinic for therapy. Their experience of trauma was at a pre-verbal age. They were taken out of their family of origin at the ages of 1 and 2, before they could say anything that made sense, before they really retained information like that. I think they're 6 and 7 now, still come to our clinic. When they first started coming to my clinic, they're in foster care now. Their family of origin was a Spanish-speaking home. And when they come to my clinic and sit in the waiting room, and a family comes in and they're speaking to each other in Spanish, these kids get intensely dysregulated. That's a trauma trigger for them, even though they can never put it into words. They're never going to know their story until someone else tells them. But their body knows it. Their body knows that story, and they're climbing the walls and throwing things at each other, intensely dysregulated because of what happened to them. The most important place to ask this question, we need to ask it out loud. I can't tell you how many times when I speak and we talk about this, I have somebody come up, either speak during or come up to me afterwards, and they say, wow, you're right, because I had horrible things that happened to me in childhood. And then I spent the better part of a decade living with that and dealing with that, with a lot of unhealthy behaviors. And then one day, somebody actually took the time to say, hey, what happened to you? What's going on? It broke open and allowed the healing to start. We have to ask this question out loud, but the most important place to ask this question is inside my own head. I need to know that something might have happened to each one of you, myself included, that we all have our stories. And when I ask this question inside my own head, when I'm interacting with somebody, even if that's the lady in front of me in the grocery store line who has 16 items in the 10 item or less line, and she's pissing me off, she's a jerk. Woman, I know you can count. You know, you're putting your items up one by one by one. Get out of the line. Come on. Can't you read 10 items or less? But when I ask this question, I can frame things differently. Helps me reframe behavior. And when I ask this question, I can realize that there might be a story there. If I ask it out loud, I might find out that story, that she just clocked out of her first job and she's rushing home to get food on the table for her kids, because 45 minutes from now, she's got to be clocking into her second job. And if she doesn't do that, she's going to get fired and she's not going to have a roof over her head, food on the table, lights on for her family. And that is what's more important than me, who's behind her in the 10 item or less line. And quite frankly, right now in this moment, she doesn't care about me, and that's okay, because she's got her priorities. When we look through this trauma-informed lens, when we ask this question, what happened to you, we honor that story, which is vitally important because it helps us with compassion and empathy, which we have to have. We have to have compassion and empathy because that's where the healing starts.
Resilience tool number 1, when helping others, remember to respond to the needs being expressed rather than react to the behavior being exhibited. 3 building blocks to success when we come back.
This is your escape from a long day, your Tuesday night routine. It's the 1 hour you reserve just for you. Right now, it's the only thing that will calm him down. That's why at MediaCom, we're working harder to bring you more superior TV entertainment every day. Greater reliability, incredible picture and sound. So from the big screen to the little screen, to the great outdoors, nothing gets in the way of the things you love.
With TiVo, you can record shows to watch later, of course, but you can also access popular video apps right on your TV. And you can watch your recordings or stream live TV on your mobile device, making any screen in your home a TV screen. TiVo's free app even lets you schedule your recordings when you're not at home.
Seriously, you have to watch this show.
Don't mind if I do. With TiVo, you'll never have to miss a thing. For special offers on TiVo, call 888-SIMPLIFY.
Welcome back to the special edition of Resiliency Matters. Let's rejoin John at his Resiliency Symposium presentation, and I'll be back with tool number 2.
This is a model from Margaret Blaustein. She has done a number of different works with this, and this comes through the Community Resilience Initiative, which comes through Walla Walla, Washington. And when we look at this model of resilience, I want to use this as a framework to kind of think about how we help kids re-regulate, how we help with those brains that have lids that are flipped. When we look at this, the cornerstone, the fundamental piece of building resilience in individuals is attachment, is connections, is not feeling alone. Not feeling alone. I have to feel connected in the world. Think about in your programs, especially you who are in schools, think about how often when you have kids that are misbehaving, kids with those regulatory behavioral issues, think about how often those kids are kids who feel very alone, who feel not connected with anybody, any meaningful connection. And by meaningful connection, I mean more than just a Facebook friend. I mean someone who really has my back, someone who I know, oftentimes in the foster care community, we call this having an unwavering champion. Knowing that I can depend on someone else. Think about how often when something big and bad happens in our community, that later on when we hear what the real story was behind that person's life, we find out that that person was very alone. Unfortunately, we don't put a lot of that story in the media. What we put in the media is the event. Think back, February 14th, Nicholas Cruz down in Parkland, Florida. Made awful choices. Awful choices. And I'm not making excuses for his behavior at all. But what I do know is in learning about his story, learning about the 18 years prior to him taking a gun into a high school, were pretty sad. And a lot of missed opportunity. A lot. Vast bucket of missed opportunity. And I'm not blaming anybody who was in his community either. But what I do know is there was a lot of missed opportunity. A lot of opportunities there that people didn't plug into. So we have to help people feel not alone. That is the fundamental core of building resiliency. And of course, resiliency is the medicine that we prescribe for people who've experienced trauma. So attachment, connection is the core. And then through that attachment, I get co-regulation. I get to work with other people and help co-regulate my emotions and my body. So the next on the list, we have regulation. Regulation, two different forms. We have emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is how I deal with my feelings, obviously. First off, I need a feelings vocabulary. I need to be able to know the word mad and sad and scared and happy. But those are just the 4 emotions that everybody knows. But if I don't know what to label to put on that feeling of jealousy or even that feeling of pride, I don't know what to do with it. Having a feelings vocabulary helps me with the first step in terms of being able to deal with that feeling. And then I have to sense in, is the way I think about it, to sense into that feeling into my body, into knowing what it feels like in my body. Because I know the word mad, but I don't know what it's like, what to call it when my fists get all clenched and my chest gets tight and my face gets flush. I don't know what to call that. I need people to help me connect that experience, that concept with my body. Because especially when people have experienced trauma, we get these disconnects between upstairs and downstairs brain. We get these disconnects between left hemisphere and right hemisphere brain, and we get disconnects between the brain and the body. So regulation. And then, of course, I need coping skills. I need to figure out what to do with those feelings, whether it's taking a deep breath, whether it's going and punching a pillow, whether it's taking a walk, whether it's realizing I need to sit down and have a conversation with somebody who cares about me, whatever that is. I need to be able to know what to do with those feelings and have some effective tools in my toolbox. And for all of you educators, mental health professionals, all your different roles, we need to be able to help kids learn those. I've worked with amazing schools that during the first 2 weeks of school, every teacher and these have been elementary schools, so they don't have like 6 or 7 different classes. But imagine being in an elementary school where in the first 2 weeks, your expectation as a teacher is to meet one-on-one with every student in your class, to have a conversation about what works for you when your lid's flipped. How can I help you? What does that look like? And what do you need from me when you flipped your lid? Do you need time away? Do you need to sit in the back of the classroom? Do you need to tear stuff up and we'll send you back to the recycling bin? Do you just have a big heart and you need to go back and write a letter to your mom? Do you need to do something physical and tangible and work some Play-Doh or clay or a fidget? What do you need? Because the resiliency plan for you might be different than the resiliency plan for you. And I, as a teacher or administrator, I can't paint everybody with the same resiliency plan. How many of you in here like yoga? How many of you in here hate yoga? Exactly. Exactly. So if we were to prescribe yoga for everybody, there are a lot of people in this room that would actually dysregulate. Interventions have to be individualized. So we have emotional regulation, but then we also have body regulation. We have to be able to regulate our bodies. How many of you are pen clickers? How many of you are pen tappers? How many of you are toe tappers? I've been watching you. How many of you are leg jigglers? Yeah. Those are all ways that you're regulating your body. Think about how awful it would be if I asked everyone in this room to sit up, put your feet flat on the floor, put your back straight up, put your hands folded in your lap, and that's my expectation for the duration of this 45-minute workshop. Would you pay attention more or less? Less. Would you like me more or less? Less. Exactly. Exactly. But then we have kids, if we look at early care, we have kids that we put in circle time and we demand that everybody has to sit in crisscross applesauce, right? Well, crisscross applesauce ain't right for every kid. We have to be able to honor the body regulation that we need. We have to be able to honor that in the kids that we work with. Think about what kids want to do when they go to the park. They want to spin, they want to slide, they want to swing, and they want to run fast. Stimulates the vestibular system in our brain, promotes regulation. As we grow up, we forget that. We have to be able to regulate bodies, and we have to give kids the tools to regulate their bodies. Then the third element up there, competence. Competence is about self-esteem. We need to be able to do something well, we need to be able to know that we do something well, and we need to be able to be honored and respected and valued for doing something well. With that kid who sabotages, that kid who sits there and is building that big block tower, and they build up that block tower, or that kid who's like drawing a cool, awesome piece of art, and then you go up to him and you say, wow, that's an amazing block tower, and then they do what? Knock it down, exactly. And like we talked about this morning, I don't like your compliment because you're challenging my script. You're challenging my narrative. Right? Because I already know that I'm worthless. I know that I don't produce good things. I was kind of experimenting with that for a little bit, but you know, I got to prove to you that I am worthless, that I don't produce good things, that I'm a mess up, a screw up. Because that's what I've been taught by my world experience, by people's words and people's actions. The way around that is to go back to attachment, is to go back to relationship. Because I don't feel safe enough in my relationship with you for you to challenge my narrative. So you can't just keep glomming on competence. You can't just keep glomming on self-esteem building. You got to go back to the foundation. You got to go back to attachment and connection with the other.
Tool number 2, the cornerstone of resilience is meaningful connection. It's about not feeling alone. How can you more powerfully author your own story? Stay with us.
This is your escape from a long day, your Tuesday night routine. It's the 1 hour you reserve just for you. Right now, it's the only thing that will calm him down. That's why at Mediacom, we're working harder to bring you more superior TV entertainment every day. Greater reliability, incredible picture and sound. So from the big screen to the little screen, to the great outdoors, nothing gets in the way of the things you love.
With TiVo, you can record shows to watch later, of course, but you can also access popular video apps right on your TV. And you can watch your recordings or stream live TV on your mobile device, making any screen in your home a TV screen. TiVo's free app even lets you schedule your recordings when you're not at home.
Seriously, you have to watch this show.
Don't mind if I do. With TiVo, you'll never have to miss a thing. For special offers on TiVo, call 888-SIMPLIFY.
Welcome back to Resiliency Matters. We're joining John Richardson-Lauve as he talks about authoring your own story. I'll be back with your final takeaway.
This model is not just a model for the kids that we work with. This is the same model for us in the self-care that we need to do for ourselves, right? Because when I go, well, I don't do yoga because it would dysregulate me, but for those of you who like yoga, it's very much a body thing, which is all about regulation and competence. If you want to do that penguin pose or whatever the yoga move is and do it better, that's about competence. If you go home and you cook, that's about competence. And if you're doing it for your family, that's about attachment. If you go home and you put on that music, that playlist that you got in your car, really after a really rough day, or maybe after a great day, you have a different playlist that you put on, that's about body regulation and rhythm. All the things that we do for ourselves are going to fit in one of these categories. All the effective resilience-building self-care activities are going to fit in one of these categories too. Because this is not an us and a them conversation. This is an everybody conversation. And what we do for ourselves, we are role models for the people that we work with and for. And self-care is not self-indulgence. It's self-respect. You have to be able to role model that and live that out. Because we need to be healers and helpers and strong, not just for today, but for tomorrow too. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to do that. Because we want to help other people, but again, not just for today, but for tomorrow too. So when we work to build what we call trauma-informed community, when I think of trauma-informed community and resilient community, I think of anything beyond the one-on-one relationship. That could be a family, that could be a classroom, that could be a school, that could be an organization, that could be a true community. And these are the 4 R's. They come from SAMHSA as kind of some guidelines for a trauma-informed approach. In Virginia, we have probably close to a dozen now what are called trauma-informed community networks that look at not just an organization or a school or an institution, but look at a community. In Richmond, where I'm from, we have an organization, our Greater Richmond Trauma-Informed Community Network, that brings in 300 plus different individuals representing more than 80 organizations that come together into the same room once every 2 months and have conversations about what does Richmond look like if we build resiliency in everybody. How do we do that in a very meaningful way so that social services and child protective services and the school system and law enforcement and juvenile court judges and adult incarceration and the sheriff's office and mental health providers and foster care providers and geriatric nursing homes, everybody gets to be in the same room to say, what can we do to leverage our community impact to deal with the trauma and build resilience? It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So when we do that, we have committees. I was telling Apara earlier, we have a policy committee that convenes these groups from all over the state. So we're able to come together and then influence legislation through the governor's office and our General Assembly. We have a training committee that goes out and does trauma-informed trainings all over the place. We have a schools committee that goes out and focuses on our school system. We have a higher education committee. It was mentioned earlier this morning. We have a higher education committee that's working from a policy standpoint to work with teacher licensure programs as well as teacher education programs so that this is infused into both licensing curriculum mandatorily and into education curriculum for higher ed. We have all these different, we have a legal and courts committee that goes into juvenile domestic relations courts to talk to the attorneys, the state attorneys, to talk to the judges, to help them be informed. It's an opportunity. And that's how we create trauma-informed community. This is the same framework that we'd use for a classroom, for an organization, or for a general community. Same thing. Because when we create trauma-informed community, we're creating what we call the virtuous cycle. Unfortunately, we know that adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma is a vicious cycle. That if I'm a parent with an ACE score of a 6 or a 7 or an 8, that I'm very likely to have a kid who by the age of 18 is going to have an ACE score somewhere around a 6 or a 7 or an 8. Because consciously or unconsciously, I'm going to expose my kid to the same experiences that I had. It was good enough for me, so it's good enough for my kid too. Consciously or unconsciously, I'm going to bring in a partner who's going to be abusive towards me. I'm going to have substance abuse problems. I'm going to end up with a partner who ends up getting locked up. Whatever that is, I'm going to expose my kid to a significant and comparable level of trauma. What we want to do when we look at creating trauma-informed community is not just working with the 12-year-old that comes to my office, but is working with the parenting generation. Is working from a community perspective, because if we can do that, if we can wrap community members with resilience, the people who are taking care of our kids, then we have a golden opportunity in the critical moments of kids' lives. We have this opportunity to create this virtuous cycle and prevent that trauma. And then once that trauma is created, we can respond effectively to that trauma and promote healing, which cuts off those negative health outcomes that come from childhood trauma and chronic toxic stress. Brené Brown writes about in her, what she wrote called the Manifesto of the Brave and the Brokenhearted. Brené Brown writes about how some people, most of us, many people in our communities, want to be the heroes of our own stories. But that shouldn't be our goal. Unfortunately, oftentimes, people write themselves in as being the victim or the villain in their own story. But of course, that's not the goal either. That our goal needs to be the author of our own story. And when we are the author of our own story, and when we empower those around us and those that we serve in our community to be the author of their own story by building up resiliency inside them so they can be strong enough to not be defined by their trauma, then I get to decide how my story is written. What I don't get to do is tear pages out of my story, because what happened to me at the age of 12 is always going to be there. What I do get to decide if what happened to me at the age of 12 is going to be the title of my book. Put it on a t-shirt, put it on billboards, that's who I am, trauma at the age of 12. Or if I want to take that story and make it just a chapter within my book, with a whole lot of other story there too. Or I can take that and make it just a couple paragraphs within a chapter. Or I can take that and just make it a couple sentences. I get to decide how my story is written. I get to decide how I'm defined. But I only get to do that if I'm a resilient individual. And resilience gets built by us. We have the opportunity in the critical moments of kids' lives to impact them, to strengthen them, to help them survive and thrive. And with the opportunity to look through this trauma-informed lens, with the opportunity to really interact with people, to build attachment, healthy attachments, to build regulation, to build competence, we have the opportunity to help kids survive and thrive.
And tool number 3, you are the author of your own story. Although you might not be able to erase a history of trauma, you can choose how much attention you give to each experience in the narrative of your life. Thanks to John for a great presentation, and thanks to you for joining us on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.